Well, I feel overwhelmed actually because those two were freshmen in college. I mean, I'm working in the university setting, and I don't think I was doing that level of research, presenting. As you can tell, I can't speak very well as a freshman in college. So well done, you two. That was tremendous. My, my daughter's going to be starting college pretty soon, and I'm not sure she's ready for that either. So that was quite awe-inspiring. Um, some of you met me yesterday. I just came to some of the trainings. I'm a physical education teacher, education professor at the University of Wyoming. You can tell by my accent, obviously, that I've lived there for 20 years. But really, I've been working. I've been fortunate to be working with a middle school teacher. That light is really incredible in your eyes. I'm going to stand here if you don't mind. I don't know if that'll impact the virtual folks. But been working with a 2018 middle school teacher who I used to teach in the undergraduate program. She became a middle school teacher in Laramie, Wyoming, and she came to the 2018 training, and she's phenomenal. So when I talk about this data, I don't want to hide her and her impact on the students and this data, because when we're doing research, we sometimes the teacher is silenced in some of that data, and I want to really give a big shout out, and I listen to a lot of your sort of reflections and the work you do in the community engagement group, and how she has been such an important part. So when I'm evaluating the program, it's hidden that I'm also evaluating her impact and how easy she's been to work with in collecting some of this data. I train teachers, PE teachers. I've done for a lot of years. I was originally a high school teacher for 6 years before I came over to the US. And I wanted to just share a little bit about many of you are middle school teachers, and I send my pre-service teachers and I go and watch them teach, and I've actually had them deliver some of the Writing for Focus curriculum too. So I'm relatively familiar with the curriculum. But my bigger interest is really looking at this bigger question for me over this last 10 years. What do kids take out of the gym? So we're doing these curriculum programs, instructional models. In this case, it's biking. But what does that mean for kids? And how does it develop their physical literacy and their motivation to engage outside of what we're doing in physical education? And I want to just give a bit of a shout out to my colleagues here, who most of those, they're two doctoral students and Dr. Cynthia Hartung, who's in psychology. She's a clinical psych person. So many of you are familiar with this term. It's in all of our national standards. But what is it? We haven't done a pretty good job of really. I heard you mentioned this word physical literacy. Well, really what it is when students can get sufficient disposition that they want to engage in physical activity, whatever it is. Not just now, but in the future. It becomes part of their lifestyle. And that's really what physical literacy is. And it can come in different forms with different activities. And really today's presentation is really, it's an embodied dimension that we prioritize movement into our lives. And we've seen from a lot of these studies that, and this needs to happen early. If students become physically illiterate, particularly in the middle school age, where we see this sometimes catastrophic drop-off in physical activity, it's hard to get it back. And so I think you folks who work in middle schools have such an important job, because that is a big drop-off point for kids' engagement in movement. We start socializing it out of them, and so what can we do to get them back on their physical literacy journey? And so in terms of what is that, it is a competence piece. Kids need to be able to do these activities, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that with the Writing for Focus. But most importantly, they have to be motivated to do it. Just because I can do something does not necessarily mean I'm going to do it. And also, do I have the confidence to do that? And we're going to been with numerous conversations about social environment, so I'm going to pick up on that a little bit today. But Whitehead really talks about that definition, and if you look through it, you have to have all of those elements there. If I don't have the competence, it's unlikely I'm going to have the motivation. And some of my recent research is also looking at this emotional connection. And Simon talked about enjoyment and kids having an emotional connection to an activity. But anyway, I would like to talk a little bit about this. How did I get involved with the biking? I'm a keen biker, but that's not necessarily why I got involved in this research. But really, some of these early Riding for Focus data showed, and actually just now presented, that kids who experience it in PE, when you are teaching them these biking skills, they want an outlet for it. What can I do with this? As PE teachers, our job is to, give them the skills and knowledge, but can we give them the outlet? What can we do? And my research over the last sort of decade has really been looking at this connection between PE and then extracurricular. I've worked in elementary schools with lunch recess. If we do an activity in PE, will kids choose to do it in recess to keep them more active? As you all know, we're not on the high landscape of importance in PE curriculum. And we don't have a lot of PE curriculum time, particularly in elementary. And so really creating these outlets and opportunities for kids becomes very important if we're going to develop their physical literacy. And so I've done it with some different models. I've looked at sport education, the innovative program where she had all the roles that Ben presented on yesterday is a model that I've used a lot in PE. Now, so I'm not only a teacher trainer, as in a teacher educator, I'm also a researcher. And so my job is to add some science to understanding. Well, as a profession, we've been a little bit short in terms of we're making the case of why we exist as PE teachers to create lifelong movers. We've just not really done a good job in showing that we do that. And so my job is to add some what we call empirical data to that whole mechanism. And so really, this is a psychological framework for understanding what goes on in PE, and then how does it translate from a psychosocial standpoint to kids biking outside of PE. And so the couple of terms mentioned, one by Simon, was this autonomous motivation. So on the left-hand side of the blue line is, I don't think the pointer's working. So really what you want to do in physical education is get kids more autonomously motivated or self-determined. Now, how do you do that? There's a number of different strategies, but basically you want kids to develop competence. You want to feel them related to each other in the class. And autonomous. What does that mean? They have some voice, choice, and volition in what you're asking them to do. So the sergeant major coach at the side is not particularly autonomous promoting. So what we did was we looked at the Riding for Focus curriculum, which all of you have been trained on the last couple of years. And over the last 3 years, we looked at whether their experience in Riding for Focus, did it promote autonomous motivation or self-determined motivation in the kids? And does that then transfer if we offer extracurricular opportunities in biking? And so what we do see is that if you develop those more self-determined autonomous motivation in PE, in leisure time, that will transfer. Now, what's important is just because you do a good job in PE does not mean kids are going to bike after school. There's a whole range of behavioral. I'm into behavior change. I'm not a neuroscientist. You could put me one of those things on, and I probably wouldn't show much of anything really most of the time. But what we do see is that once they develop a sort of motivation for biking in one context, it will transfer to another if that context provides them a similar environment. So what that means is if you're providing autonomy support in your after-school club, in the way it's structured, it's likely that those kids will want to continue to do that. So here's an important piece. What you offer in PE, if you want to do an after-school activity, you need to create that environment that is inclusive, socially connected, the same as you would do in the PE environment. So that's important too. Now, what are the 3 factors that really impact whether kids want to bike after school or whenever that is intention. One of the strongest predictors of actual behavior, if you intend to do it. Now, that's not a 100% thing, but if you want to develop kids' willingness to do, if they intend to do it, that will be a large predictor. So what predicts their intention to, for example, offer like participate in extracurricular biking, whether it's transport or whether it's in a club, is their positive attitude to that activity. That tends to be activity specific. Okay, so I might really like biking, but I hate soccer. I can't believe I just said that, but because that's not true. But subjective norm. What do other people in your lives value about you doing that activity? Now, we've talked yesterday, I'm looking at who are those significant others impacting what we do in terms of physical activity. Sometimes, usually, with the younger children, it's parents. But as we get into the middle school age, as many of you know these kids, it's their friends, their peers, their social groups. For kids who have different challenges at home, it could be you. You're their safe space. So subjective norm is an important variable in whether they enact that behavior. And the last one is their behavioral control. Do I have the resources to do this activity? Now, this could be, do I have a bike? Can I borrow the school's bikes? Or do I feel competent enough to bike? So resources can be internal or external to whether you enact an actual behavior. And so this is the framework that I use to evaluate our program. We had it. And really, over the last 3 years, we've been collecting data in PE as the teachers have been delivering the program, the Riding for Focus. And then what we did was offer an after-school biking club twice a week. And it wasn't the PE teacher that was offering it. It was we have a science teacher, and we have our speech pathology teacher. We're just keen bikers and wanted to get work with the kids in a different context. And so we were really looking at whether biking, particularly the Riding for Focus curriculum, supports these pathways of this model. We've got about 200 students in the data set. They each completed online questionnaires, similar to what Esther's been doing pre and post, beginning of the Riding for Focus curriculum and then the after. And then just this last year, we've started interviewing the kids that are attending the after-school biking club. We wanted a bit more of a deep dive into what they thought about it and why they were attending, because we saw some really interesting patterns in the type of kids that were coming to the after-school club compared to perhaps your normal team sports that are occurring in middle school. So that will make your eyes glaze over in a heartbeat. So I was a PE teacher. I'm like, what is he talking about? So here's what's important from this particular slide. And I'm a math geek, and I guess that's why I went a little bit into academia. But what we did see on the left-hand side there, when there's those yellow boxes, yellow's important in life. So that's why I've highlighted those. The Riding for Focus curriculum does develop more autonomous forms of motivation. It's less controlling. I would suggest, and I've talked to Esther about this, and Ben a little bit, that I think the curriculum could be tweaked a little bit more to be a little bit more student-centered. It's still quite teacher-directed. It does a really good job of developing kids' skills and safety, like we saw in the data. I think we could develop more some socialization, kids interacting with each other more purposefully, particularly in the latter part of the curriculum. That's just a 5 cents from me in terms of this framework. And it does transfer over into the leisure time context. These beta coefficients, they're predictive values. If they're higher, if they're getting closer to 1, that's a good thing. And so what we're seeing is that and they've shifted in the way on the slide. They're not as clear in the way that they've come out. But basically, the motivation in the after-school program did predict their positive attitude and their subjective norm. And subjective norm was the most important variable in impacting their intention for riding outside of PE. The R-squared values explain variance, which again is a geeky thing, but it really does. To what degree does it explain their actual participation? So R-squared values go from 0 to 1. So it's about 20%. So it's okay. the intention value is a lot higher. What was really important here is perceived behavioral control can be a big barrier for younger kids, particularly in extracurricular settings. Mum or dad can't get them there. They don't have a bike. We took those variables away. And so this didn't become a negative barrier to their actual participation. That's what that kind of shows. So it did transfer across, and autonomous motivation, the leisure time context was a strong predictor of intentional behavior. Subjective norm and attitude was the strongest predictors. So this is where we get the storytelling. We started interviewing the kids. So we've got the model as a whole is pretty well supported for biking, and particularly the riding for focus curriculum. But this last year, we started talking to these kids who were coming to the club, and we probably get in between 25 and 30 every session. And we saw some really different types of kids. Remember, this is after school, so the athletic, sporting, team sport kids, they were doing volleyball, basketball, whatever they were doing. Then we started getting kids coming from the PE setting who'd never biked before. They'd learned to bike in PE. We had 2 kids who were diagnosed with autism. They would bring their paras with them, or their paras agreed to come to the club, so they would bike with them. And so we were fascinated what it is about this experience that made them want to come. This was the most important theme we got from those initial interviews. Subjective norm expectation from the model test. We wanted to say, what were they saying about this? It's their friends. We ride together, so it makes it more fun. The thing I like most about mountain biking is that I made a lot of friends. They want to see me. I want to have a friend to bike with. If you're setting up an after-school club, if you're thinking about that and you're planning next year, think about that. Their friends for this group of kids are very important in whether they will go and attend or not. So that was an important factor. Parents are still, we was a little surprised about this. We think middle schoolers just do their own thing because they're middle schoolers, right? But they're not. Their parents will dictate to some degree if they overtly or indirectly support. They think if they think their significant others, in this case their parents, think it's something that would be good, they tended to do it. Or they were doing it with their parents outside of the club too. Me and my dad usually bike. We as a family like to bike. So what we realize here is that parents can be looped in and can be a supportive piece of this if you want your kids to attend the after-school club. And generally, these kids are not particularly what we would call in your PE classes, the kids that are into team sports, highly coordinated. These kids are kids that you would not necessarily think would come to the biking club. And they got on the bike, they learned how to bike, and they found that it was a positive experience for them. And it was in a non-competitive environment that was mentioned earlier, particularly in the after-school setting. So we can go to trails. They're in different groups. They get to choose which group they go in, how hard the trail set they get in. So we're developing that autonomy support within the extracurricular context. That is important too. And if you want to attract these different types of kids. So here's my take-homes. How do we develop biking as a form of physical literacy and physical education and make them want to take it out of the gym or out the field or wherever into other contexts? Have the bikes available for use after school in a supervised context. Still having that structure to biking within the after school is important, and being purposeful in how you allow the kids to socialize, choose what level of trail they want to go on, who they're going to be with, let them do that. That's what's important to them. So, but still have it supervised and kids being safe. Develop the students' confidence and competence to ride in physical education. That's the power of this curriculum. Kids will get competent in biking. If they didn't feel competent, there's no way that they would come to the after-school club. So that's important too. It appeals to students who do not participate in other team sports after school. One, those kids can't do it, but that's actually good because these other kids now get a different outlet beyond what we've traditionally offered these kids as outlets for their physical literacy. They get to bike, and that's and you think in Wyoming, many of you know, maybe think about Wyoming, it's a big old space with not many people in it. And we do have a lot of trails, but you'd be surprised how few kids bike. So I think it's important to understand that. Develop socialization during rides. In our first year, we had 80% males come in. In this last year, we've got about a 50-50 split. We created girls-only rides. We let the girls absolutely socialize together, particularly for the girls. That's really important, and they're not at all particularly interested in competing. Let them integrate with each other and allow them that opportunity, developing socialization during the rides. And encourage parents to support the initiative by making biking a fun experience if they have that at home. Some kids don't. Some kids don't have parents that bike. That we get that. But if you can fold in from the data, if you can fold in some level of support, not that the parents have to bike with the kids, but at least it's good to bike, and the parents are not worried that this is an unsafe activity. So those are kind of my take-homes from the work that we've done in terms of you as middle school teachers, as you get to grips with the new curriculum and your bikes and figuring that out. And then if you are thinking about after-school programming and making that as an attractant for the kids, these are some of the data, sort of evidence-based pieces that we've got from the data over the last 2 or 3 years. So hopefully that was useful, because I like to speak to teachers. I don't like to always give the statistics, but some researchers really like that, the statistics side of that. Okay, just on a final, thank you for listening. I want to thank Outride and Esther for being awesome to work with in the way that they've supported this work. And I think it's important work as we build a sort of evidence for the impact of this work. And also, as I said right at the start, I work with this teacher, but she particularly is the most important piece of this, because of the opportunities. She put the grant together in 2018. She came here. She's driven the whole department of middle school, other PE teachers she works with, to do this work. And so great kudos to her. So thank you.
Questions?
So I'm also an athletic director at our middle school and high school, and we have an issue sometimes with liability and insurance, things like that. The school provides for some things and not for others. Have you had any incidences where parents were nervous about potential injuries or insurance things, or does the school support that?
Yeah, that's a good point. When we first, particularly on the after-school programming, right? And so we did have the kids sign it. We approached the school district as a whole, and then we had the kids sign a liability waiver because obviously there is that concern. I think the Writing for Focus curriculum has been good because it's such focused on safety and basic skills that I think the parents were less worried about it, because the kids would come home, and we've been doing biking and nothing terrible was happening in the PE class. I think there's a two-part to that. You have to cover yourself from a liability standpoint, particularly on the after-school programming. But most importantly, if your curriculum in the PE is so focused in that domain, I think that can alleviate that, kids are not coming home from lesson 1 with broken arms because they flipped over the handlebars, although I have done that. So, but yeah, I think that is something to consider on your after-school programming. Work with your principals, work with your district, and making sure that, because there's some interesting coverage pieces at the high school because it's not NHSAA, and so you just need to make sure. And we have a NICA program in our high school, not in our middle school, but and they helped us a little bit with just dealing with the liability form. But that's a good question. I'm holding up lunch. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Wallhead. And all right, thought that was on. All right. Thanks to all of our presenters, and now we're going to bring up Dr. Walker again to close us out.
Awesome. Thank you, Chaz. Thanks to all of the presenters. Here, I'll give you this one too. Yeah, sorry we ran a little bit over today. We'll, try to make it up for, you can all go out into the world, into the social hour and online. Don't worry, we'll find a way to connect with you all as well. But really just wanted to thank you all for your attendance, your attention, your engagement today, both in person and virtually. I think it's been a really amazing day, hearing about all the incredible research being carried out all around the world, really all focused on the power of, physical activity and the bike and the transformative power that it can afford. And so I think, many of you are here today listening in because you have your own story and your own connection with the bike, what it gave you. And I think, one thing we've seen starting from the first presentation all the way through is that we know while the bike certainly can't solve everything, it's really been an incredible tool for so many of us to support our brains and our minds and to bring entire communities together. And so we hope the summit has really provided you all with some powerful data you can share with your communities across the country, across the world. And a huge thanks again to all of our presenters. Again, not just the ones who are able to show up here today, also the ones in all sorts of time zones across the world, really kind of lending their expertise and time to share with us today. I'd also really like to thank the entire Outride team. So Dave, Lauren, Chaz, Tasha, Nick, as well as both Mike and Kim for their support of Outride, along with all of the 70 plus champion trainers or teacher champions who came out, as well as the champion trainers this week who really raised the stoke coming into this event and are really pumped to get more youth on bikes across the country. So I want to first give a round of applause to all of them. And then finally, again, these events, even though I feel like I'm relatively technically savvy, a lot of things can go wrong. And so I'd really like to thank Ace and Anthony and the entire Specialized crew for their support, really helping to ensure this can all happen. Because as you know, Outride, we're a small team and we're forever thankful for all of the support that we are so lucky to get from the entire Specialized crew. And if you're interested in supporting youth cycling near you, please keep an eye out for the next round of Outride Riding for Focus grants, the Outride Fund. And if you want to learn more and stay in touch, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter, see what we're up to on Instagram. And now for those of us who are here in person, please join us in the lobby for refreshments and conversation. And for those of you online, we thank you for joining us virtually. We'll be in touch and sharing all sorts of resources to help you continue to grow youth cycling wherever you are. And remember, together we can all outride anything. Thank you.